Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Shaw.
Mrs. Womack.
Coming at you again, this time Chapter 10. Welcome to the final video.
Oh my god. Final video.
Looks like we made it. Oh, you need to be up here. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Interest groups is our topic of conversation today, and really good one.
Yeah.
No, it's a good one. Lots of influence in government. We'll be fine.
True.
We'll be good. All right. So we're going to explain the origins of interest groups in America and the theories of their role in our democracy. So the biggest thing you need to understand about the role of interest groups is that they developed as a way to pursue policy goals. Again, we as individuals don't really have a lot of power. However, when we join together, we use the power of numbers. Again, strength in numbers, things like that. Like that's true for interest groups because they have a lot of voting power. Same thing. They get confused sometimes with political parties. Again, the biggest difference is that they don't run candidates. They are policy specialists, not generalists. So, for example, Greenpeace is only going to be concerned about the environment, whereas the Democratic Party has many other things that they care about in addition to the environment. There are 23,000 interest groups. That's probably an old number, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that number has risen. The thing about what we're going to talk about later is that whatever policies are released by the government, those trigger the creation of interest groups, because interest groups either want to protect the idea or whatever policy was passed, or there could be policies that are people are opposed to, and they might try to get it repealed. And again, technology also aids lobbying. Again, things like just sending out, really just email, I feel like, is probably the biggest thing, or cell phones have really made the process of lobbying a lot easier.
Agreed.
So this is interest group participation. Again, compared to other countries, again, you see the participated in a civic organization much higher, actually. So this is interesting, considering when we talked about the voting patterns. The voting patterns were very, very low percentage compared to other countries, but we have a lot more participation in civic associations. As of 2007, over 50% of people had. That surprises me.
Yeah. Same.
Or worked. So I guess civic association could be like any number of things, but like work together with people to express political views. That's still even higher, but at 35%. So maybe we should say 35% have joined interest groups, but there's still a big interest in government participation in general.
Yeah.
They just don't vote.
I don't know.
What? That's silly. Go vote.
Association. Okay, pluralism. So this is probably a term that rings a bell, Mr. Shaw.
It should.
Yeah. So it is, just to rewind really quickly. So in Unit 1, we cover different types of representative democracies. Pluralism, elitism. What's the third? Participatory. Okay, so just...
I said it first.
Going back a little bit. Okay, so pluralism, group theory of politics. So groups provide a key link between people and government. So remember, the idea of pluralism is that, several groups are influencing government in any given kind of way at any given time. Okay, so the idea here is that groups compete, and because of that competition, we kind of sprout new policies out of them, right? And so that's how they influence government. So no one group is likely to become too dominant. And again, we kind of go back to the last slide where it said there's 23,000 interest groups. That's a lot. So because there's so many, not one of them is going to become super overly powerful. Now, there are some that are pretty powerful, that have a lot of influence in our government, but in general, hopefully not one will become just too overly dominant. Groups usually play by the rules of the game, and groups weak in one resource can use another. So maybe sometimes they team up to help each other out.
Well, I think that what that means is that, like, if, for example, like a lot of environmental groups are very low funded,
yes.
But they are very popular, so they have a really high, participation rate or whatever, but they just don't really raise funds. So it's, they have a lot of voting power, but not a lot of financial power.
Yeah, resources available. Sure. Okay, second slide, concessions then. So, like pretzels and hot dogs?
Ooh, let's go.
Okay. Some groups are stronger than others, so I kind of jumped ahead of myself here. So an example of this would be like the NRA, the National Rifle Association. They're a very, very strong, influential interest group. So they would kind of fit into this category. And all interest groups do not get equal hearing. So again, depending on how much resources you have, how much funding you have, the popularity of an interest group, those are all kind of contributing factors into how much airtime, if you will, an interest group might get from our government, and then therefore how much influence they can have in creating policy.
I feel like it really goes down to, like, you have to be strong in something. Like, you have to be strong financially or
Right.
strong, with your vote, like, the number of people you have. Also, the people, like something needs to be in the public opinion. Like, if people don't care about something, like, you're not going to have a lot of power in government. But if something becomes very important to the public opinion and it makes its way into the policy agenda, that interest group is going to have more power because of it.
Right. Okay.
All right, so moving on to elitism. Again, this is the idea, the representative democracy, where the real power is held by a few. 75% of Americans share this view,
Wow.
which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think in general, Americans think, or like they know about the power that corporations have and that the wealthy have in our society. 75% shocks me, though. I feel like most.
Number.
I want to see the sampling error on that. In general, though, because I feel like people wouldn't want to admit it.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, yeah, we know that they have it, but like, I matter, man.
Because it doesn't seem like we take a lot of action to change that.
Yeah, that's true. But also, the people who are very wealthy do have a lot of influence.
Yep.
So, okay. Anyway,
It's full circle.
I'm not sure what interlocking directorates means.
I don't really either.
I feel like that might be a way of organizing business. I'm not sure. We're going to have to look that up and get back to you.
Skip it.
It's probably not important. Again, you're going to talk about the other thing about multinational corporations is that these corporations have influence in a lot of different governments, not just ours. Did you not get the sponsorship by Sparkling Ice for this video?
Oh, sparkling ice.
And also Diet Coke. All right.
Cheers.
Okay, get out of here. Okay, so again, in general, you need to understand that elitism is a real thing in America, whether you want to believe it or not. The wealthy and corporations have a lot of influence because they have a lot of power. Again, and part of the reason it goes back to the last video is that these campaigns cost so much money, and politicians need it. They can't. They're afraid to even change their rhetoric about anything because if they do, they're going to lose finances.
Support.
Like most Americans, support reasonable gun laws, and that's what I mean, or reasonable like background checks and things like that.
Common sense gun legislation.
Thank you, Ms. Womack. Anyway. The lobbying is and that's really probably a great example of lobbying benefiting the few at the expense of the many. Again, the few being the wealthy. I mean, in this case with guns, the NRA. While there still can be, the people are still going to be paying the price in certain ways.
Very good. Okay, so that takes us to hyper-pluralism, which we touched on briefly in Unit 1, but it's kind of an extension of pluralism, if you will, interest group liberalism. So the idea here is that there are so many interest groups, and they're all competing to influence government and policies that it's just kind of gotten out of control. And so the government, under this kind of theory, is trying to appease all of these interest groups. And again, to go back to the 23,000 number, I mean, that's a ton of groups that the government is trying to kind of appease in certain ways. And so it's almost like overkill at this point.
And each group has its opposite. So like you can't, it's hard to please both.
Right. So budgets, programs, and regulations expand. So that ties directly into it. So we have to increase budgets, we have to increase programs, and we have to put more regulations on things. The more interest groups that kind of pop up and want to influence our government in certain ways, almost the larger the government kind of gets, right? To try to appease all these different groups.
You can't cut anything because there's somebody cares about it.
Right.
So it's impossible to cut government spending now.
Right. And so that takes us to a very big concept that we'll talk about more in class, but it's called iron triangles. And this is basically kind of a mutual relationship between interest groups, committees in Congress, and what's my third?
Bureaucracies.
Bureaucracy. Thank you. Bureaucracy. Okay. So the idea here, and again, we'll go further into, it might be on the next slide.
We've talked about it.
Yeah. So if you imagine a triangle, it's like a mutual relationship between all these different groups, and they are kind of benefiting each other in certain ways so that they can get policies made that kind of appease, again, all three of those groups. Okay. So I think your book gives like the tobacco.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or education.
Tobacco industry?
Yeah.
Education
something
industry?
like that. One of them was, yeah. It might have been in a previous chapter as well.
Yeah, it might have been. So anyway, it can become contradictory and confusing when it comes to policy results because, again, if the government's trying to appease all these different groups, you have policies created for one group that kind of contradicts the policies for the competing group that is created. And so, again, it's hyperpluralism. It's overkill when it comes to all these interest groups.
And this is happening.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to argue against it. Like it's just, this is like, you look at policies, it should be easy to pass a law to deal with the problem. But when you're also having to appease people who are opposed to the problem, like that's going to make it harder. It really is going to take the teeth out of any legislation. Okay. 10.2. What makes an interest group successful? Let's get to it. So the thing that's weird about interest groups is that you have actually a lot of advantage to staying small. And part of the reason is because it's easier to get a smaller group organized. So these are all vocab words that you definitely need to know, and it's going to kind of you'll understand once we go through kind of why smaller groups are going to take an advantage away. So the potential group, these are the people who might join your interest group, people who have a common interest. The actual group is the people in the potential group that actually join. So this, and I'm going to skip collective good for a second, and the people that don't join, they are what are called free riders. And so free riders are people that benefit from the work of the interest group, but they don't join and actually provide anything for the interest group. And so that's why they're free riders. They're just lollygagging around, getting all the benefits without putting in any of the work.
I can give an example. So, at South High School, in the Fort Zumwalt School District in general, some teachers are part of the NEA, the National Education Association, and to be a part of that, you have to pay dues. So it comes out of your paycheck every month, or you can do it in a big chunk at the beginning or whatever if you want to. And there are teachers who don't join the union, and they would be kind of considered the free riders because they're still benefiting from what the union is providing for all of us, but they're not actually paying in to the union itself, but they're still kind of getting those benefits from it. So that would be kind of just an example of what like a free rider would be.
It's fantastic.
Thank you.
And directly relevant to our lives.
Yeah.
So the other thing that you need to, so there's two types of goods or benefits. The first good is just called the collective good, and this is something of value that can't be withheld from a potential group. So think about interest groups that would work towards like universal health care. That's a collective good that would benefit all Americans theoretically, and the idea is like if an interest group got that passed or achieved that legislation, people who weren't in the interest group couldn't be withheld from that. Like, oh, well, you didn't contribute, so you don't get universal health care. Sorry. No, you can't do that. So that's why groups that they actually are working towards collective goods, they actually struggle a lot with funding the interest group because not a lot of people join because they know that they're going to reap the benefits anyway.
Right.
So the way to get around this is what's called selective benefits, and these are goods a group can restrict to those who join. Think of it like some swag that you would get, if you joined a group or something. Like that's what they do is that they give specific benefits like discounts or like some memorabilia or whatever that are only going to go to people who actually join the interest group.
Very good. Okay.
Intensity.
there's a psychological advantage to interest groups.
Yeah, I think like you're thinking about like something that people really, really care about.
Yeah.
You know, like that's the advantage of like getting people fired up and
Right.
things like that. I'm pretty sure that's what they're going for. And that's because they're kind of getting into single issue groups.
Absolutely. So that moves us into single issue groups. And these are also can be very influential.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Well,
the NRA, et cetera. Yeah. So single issue groups are groups that have a narrow interest and tend to dislike compromise and often draw membership from people new to politics. So an example of this would be the NRA, or maybe a anti-abortion group or a pro-life group or whatever it might be. But they're very focused on a single issue, and they're very determined to get policies created and passed that will support that one single issue. And it does seem to be on the rise. These single issue groups do seem to be on the rise lately. Again, examples would be nuclear power plant groups. I don't know that I have an example of that one, but
Just
gun
nuclear.
control.
That was more in the 80s, I think.
Okay. And then abortion. So I just read the book, and I literally was just like, okay, I'm going to throw this example out there, but I can't remember now. Oh, no, never mind.
I just love the dislike compromise part. But again, like if you're a single issue group, you only care about one thing. Like, why would you need to compromise?
You wouldn't.
Like, and so that's the thing. Like, it gets people into politics, but people don't understand that politics are basically just one big set of compromises.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to get these in, but like this goes back to hyperpluralism too, because if you there's no way to appease pro-life and pro-choice groups. It's just not possible.
Cut and dry, baby.
Unless we lower the level of teen pregnancies. Sorry, okay. But that would solve the problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. Or maybe come up with some kind of male birth control.
Yeah. Or make all contraceptives free.
Yeah, I mean, more access to contraceptives
or just,
in general.
Yeah, more access. Yeah, sorry, we're digressing.
Yeah, we're...
You take this.
Okay, so financial resources then. Obviously, much with a variety of other areas in our government and society in general, the system is biased towards wealthy businesses and individuals, probably. So donations lead to access. The more money and resources an interest group has, the more access they're going to have to government, and then therefore pushing their policies to be passed. Okay. But money does not always lead to lobbying success. So there are some wealthy interest groups that are usually opposed by equally wealthy or powerful interest groups. So you might have a very wealthy interest group and they're focused on an issue, but then you might have one on the very opposite side that are equally funded or have an equal amount of resources, and they're pretty much just kind of butting heads, right? So if the government creates policy that appeases the one side, they're going to probably create policy that appeases the other, and so maybe you're not getting you're not really moving forward as an interest group because, again, hyperpluralism.
Well, and I think a good one would be the big business versus labor unions.
Yes.
As interest groups, because labor unions don't have the financial resources, but they do have the voting power.
Right.
So you can't ignore the labor unions because they could literally vote you out of office.
Right.
But you can't say no to the money from the big business because again, it's so hard to fund these campaigns.
You're talking if you're a candidate. If you're someone running for office.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, just a politician in general.
Just in general, yeah.
Yeah. Like, again, if somebody donates, thousands or millions of dollars to you, you're going to pick up the phone.
Yeah, you can't ignore them.
Like, that's worse than telling them no. You have to make sure you're picking up the phone. And again, honestly, it makes me feel bad for politicians.
I don't know why anybody would want to do that job.
Unless, I guess it's awesome when they're getting all the money.
Yeah.
But again, they can use super PACs
sell
now.
Out. You're a sellout.
They can use super PACs and just buy votes with it. We should start a super PAC. Sorry, we're digressing again.
Moving on.
Okay, we're going to do that. Okay, 10.3, how groups try to shape policy. All right, so big thing here is lobbying, okay? This is the biggest takeaway. Again, when you're doing the concept application FRQ and you're talking about interest groups, you need to mention lobbying, okay? You're not going to get the point without it. So lobbying is communication not for personal gain, directed to a governmental decision maker with the hope of influencing his or her decision. Again, the not for personal gain thing here, I think that is, it means like literally the person itself. The interest group does have a vested interest in the lobbying, but not necessarily the person doing the lobbying. So there's two types of lobbyists. There are full-time employees that are lobbyists, that they literally work full-time for the interest group. They also do have temporary employees. I imagine that would pop up more when you need like a really specialized situation. So you could just go out and hire somebody, and they could go in and lobby for you. Or maybe if you needed to like somebody to go to random places, I don't know. Often, these are former legislators. Why would you think that is, Ms. Womack?
Well, they know the ins and outs of the lawmaking process and how to create policies. So sometimes these lobbyists, if they're good, they will literally come to lawmakers and they'll go, I have literally already written the bill for you. All you have to do is introduce it into the Senate or the House. And they will. Because they're very good at what they do. They get paid a large amount of money to do this from these interest groups. And so again, they will show up with the bill already written. The work is done. All you have to do is introduce it.
So again, that's like we don't. A lot of people don't talk about that, but that is accurate, and that does happen a lot in our government. And that's part of the issue is that, you know, being a congressman sucks. Like it can't be awesome. You know, think about the money you're making. You're making like what, 200,000, something,
maybe
160. Like you're working 24/7 probably, and you know you don't have time. You have to like rely on aides to write these laws. And so if somebody comes to you and be like, especially if it's something that you care about, and they say, hey, I have this bill for you that you can propose and run as your own, I mean, you're probably going to take it. And so that's going to be under the why do congressmen listen to lobbyists? That's the lobbyists providing ideas. But also they are going to provide specialized expertise. These congressmen have to know a little bit about a lot of stuff, but the lobbyists know a lot about one thing. And so lobbyists are going to be very helpful. Again, we paint them as negative, but they are actually super helpful to congressmen because there's no way a congressman can be an expert in everything. And lobbyists are going to help with political and campaign strategy. I'm interested about the campaign strategy part, but like I would imagine maybe like how should I word this? Like
I'm thinking the same thing. Like when candidates are speaking about that issue on the campaign trail or in a speech, the lobbyists will help them use the right language and how to kind of advertise it and kind of wrap it up in a good package for people.
They probably have a lot of polling data, things like that.
For sure, yeah.
Big spenders on lobbying, pharmaceuticals.
Surprise,
Imagine
surprise.
that. You know, the biggest opponent to like a more socialized medicine. Pharmaceuticals. So and insurance as well. Look at that. Interesting. Okay.
And then electricity, oil, and gas because.
They oppose renewable sources of energy.
And that's a very large topic at the moment.
Right. Okay. So again, you see this just in general, like, and I'm actually, you know, I'm really surprised about that we don't have more food, like foods, like meats or anything like that, because I would imagine that they would have had really high ones too. I'm surprised education even made the cut.
I was also surprised when I saw that
Interesting.
earlier.
Okay. Anyway,
like, what are they even pushing? Maybe higher education. I don't know. What are they even pushing?
I mean, I imagine the National Education Association probably does a lot for.
Oh yeah.
You know,
you're right.
Teacher. Or like, just, I guess I don't know.
Supporting candidates that will support teachers.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah.
Or bills that need to be passed to like redo education laws.
Absolutely.
So.
All right, electioneering. All right, so direct group involvement in the electoral process by aiding candidates financially, getting out the vote, or forming PACs. So as part of the kind of entire process when it comes to interest groups, they're going to aid not only in they have a very wide variety of things that they're going to do. Okay, so they're going to aid candidates financially. They're going to help support people to get out the vote, et cetera, et cetera. And the one very large thing that happens is PACs is what we call. They're political action committees. Okay, they are groups that are formed usually by interest groups that will raise money for a cause and then donate that money to candidates who will support that cause. It is a way to kind of, would you say it kind of works around the system?
The PAC money came, or PACs became about after certain laws were passed. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but we had talked about it in last week's video. So yeah, I would say not get around necessarily, but it's more because they have limits on direct contributions.
Right. So it's a way for interest groups to funnel money to candidates. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's almost 6,000 political action committees as of January of 2016. It's got to be increased since then. $5,000 limit in primary and general elections. And then mainly support incumbents. So people who are running for re-election, political action committees are going to support them at higher rates than newbies, challengers.
Because they know they have a history of probably supporting the interest group's ideals.
Absolutely. So candidates, unfortunately, need political action committees because, and we go back to the idea that campaigns are expensive, okay? So they need the resources and they need the funding, candidates do, to be successful. And again, because interest groups and political action committees know that maybe they already, one candidate they're already in the pockets of one candidate, they're going to continue to support that candidate who will then go and support their cause.
And they have a vested interest in making sure that person is elected, which is why they even do the electioneering in the first place, because they want to make sure they win the seat.
Right. So the last bullet there, should PACs be eliminated? There are pros and cons to them.
Yeah, I mean, the main con, I feel like, is just
pumping more money into politics, which we could probably all agree is not a great thing.
I think it's hard to argue that it's not, and it's in the idea, I guess, PACs are just one part of the issue, like they don't, honestly, like that's not even that big of a deal anymore. There's bigger
issue
problems.
is just changing the laws in general, the policies and the laws around money in campaigns and elections.
It's funny to me that poor people don't want to, they don't want to change how our politics happens.
Yeah.
They're like, oh yeah, it's fine. But your interests don't really matter as much.
Right.
Because of the influence of money in politics.
Elitism.
Whoa. Nice. Okay, so This is another, again, all of these are things that interest groups can do. The next thing is litigating. Again, think, lawyering.
Litigating is arguing court cases. I'm smart. Arguing cases.
Yes.
Litigating.
Again, so again, if you're litigating, you are literally bringing cases before the court, trying.
Is IG Instagram?
Get out of here. Okay. So when Instagram fails to achieve its legislative objectives, wow. Okay. So again, this time when an interest group, I almost said Instagram again. When an interest group fails to achieve its legislative objectives in Congress, they turn to the courts. And so now a really good example of this is the American Civil Liberties Union. And Congress is notorious for really not doing much to pass civil rights legislation. I mean, we haven't really had, I think they renewed the Voting Rights Act in 2007 or something like that. But I mean, that's been a problem, So the American Civil Liberties Union will take up cases on behalf of people, class action suits, all kinds of stuff, and they would bring it to the court and then try to achieve their goals that way, especially when they fail in Congress. So a lot of times interest groups will sue for enforcement, especially things like environmental regulations, civil rights groups, again, dating all the way back to the 1950s, NAACP, like all kinds of they're going to take part in that because that is going to be the main way to achieve their goals, especially if Congress is not doing anything to help them achieve their goals. The other thing that they will do is they will file amicus curiae briefs, which is another vocab
friend
word
of
that
the
you
court.
need to know that. It means friend of the court, and they basically just write an essay, and they send it into the court, whoever is judging the case, and it's like, hey, we have an interest in the outcome of this case, and we have information that we would like you to know. and doesn't directly influence, or it's not like supposed to, but it just if you have information that is relevant to a court's decision, then you can send in an amicus curiae brief, and interest groups will do that a lot of times to make sure that their position is heard.
Yeah, it just kind of helps to give more information to the justices that are deciding the case. And it's for groups who have a stake in the decision that's being made.
Yeah. So the other thing is, as I mentioned, class action lawsuits, and this is when a group of people have been, wronged in some way, and they basically are represented together. It's not like if there's 500 people that were, wronged or something, then they just do one prosecutor. Plaintiff, got it. One plaintiff will take that case and then sue on behalf of all of the people. Like when I was working at 54th Street, there was a class action suit against 54th Street because they did not pay us enough to make minimum wage in certain areas. Yeah, so like after we were done like waiting tables, we had like all this work to do in the back and things like that, and they were just really, really bad at piling on work to the servers and the bussers especially. And so anyway, they got sued, and I didn't actually participate for some reason. I don't know why. Anyway,
well, you weren't government.
Yeah, I wasn't very savvy. Wasn't savvy
back
then. But yeah, like that's just an example. My wife had the same thing with a BJC, with nurses and things like that. She got $7 from that class action lawsuit.
Nice.
Yeah, really breaking the bank.
Okay, so I think the last thing, maybe not.
I think so.
Going public. So public opinion obviously has a very large impact on influencing policymakers, which is basically our Congress people, our lawmakers. So interest groups could do that. This is an option for them to do. So what they want to do is try to mobilize public opinion. So they want as many people in the public as possible kind of voicing or their opinion or working in some way behind the scenes on supporting that interest group's interest, and then hopefully influencing their Congress people to vote in favor of whatever interest they're working towards. Public relations, I guess they have to have good public relations. They have to have a good presence. They want to always have a good reputation with the public. So they're. I was going to bring up an NRA example, but I'm going to.
I feel like it's really important though, just because this is probably the biggest thing for interest groups to really hammer on, is that you have to have a good the public has to view you positively.
Yeah, you have to have public support to have anything.
Correct. If you lose that, there's no going back. Like you won't exist anymore. But as I said earlier, if the public doesn't care about what you care about, you can do that by like going on the media, getting time on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and really just letting people know about what's going on, because then that is going to help it become part of the policy agenda once the policymakers care about it.
That's right.
10.4 types of interest groups. This one's a little bit confusing, so we're not going to spend too much time on it, but just know that there are different types. Again, so the first one is economic interest. I mentioned labor unions before. We have there's different types of even of that. Like there's a union shop versus right to work. Right to work basically gets rid of unions. There's essentially no unions anymore, and that means no protection for the workers. A lot of conservative politicians bring up right to work a lot, and it's seen as like a really positive thing, but it is very good for the business owners.
Yes, but not as much the workers.
Right. So they pitch it as something that is good for workers, but it's actually really bad, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about right to work.
Yeah. So right to work, essentially, in some areas, a lot of laboring areas, if you join, whatever company, and it's a union company, as someone who's getting hired into that company, I might be forced to also join the union. Okay. But that union then also gives me a lot of benefits. I have collective bargaining rights and, whatever, et cetera. In a right to work state, that kind of takes that out of the equation. So if I'm hired by a company, I don't necessarily have to join the union, which eventually weakens unions. And again, kind of when it comes to the worker, it's going to be a negative thing for workers. They're not a part of that kind of strong, powerful collective bargaining group anymore. Or, you have the choice to be or not. And so most people are going to go, oh, well, I don't want to pay the dues. I don't want to put in the work.
Right.
So right to work states, you don't have to join a union if you're hired by a certain company.
And again, the other problem that labor unions are facing is that blue collar jobs, like working jobs, are really decreased a lot with more automation and things like that, artificial intelligence. Like all of this stuff is technology is awesome. However, there is a really big side effect for labor unions and just workers in general. So they have actually lost a lot of power, but again, they can kind of gain that back in other ways sometimes. Yeah. We've talked a lot about businesses. Again, they dominate lobbying and PACs. Again, shouldn't surprise you because they have a lot of money and they want to make sure that their interests are being kept in the government. Business interests are not monolithic, though. It's interesting just because we would think that businesses and business owners would really only care about one thing. However, there are going to be a lot of different things that go into what businesses and the interest groups that support those businesses are going to care about. Again, if you're like a banking industry, technically you're a business, but you're not necessarily going to have the same goals as Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
Theoretically.
I thought this was interesting.
Wow.
So you see how this is the corporate PACs have shifted towards the majority party. Again, usually we think about how corporations focus more on Republicans in general because they are usually pass legislation that is more favorable to corporations. However, you see that when during times of Democrats in the majority, PACs are just corporate PACs anyway, are just as willing to donate to them. Although I will say the percentage is a lot higher. Mm-hmm. Like you see, it's like just barely over 50% when the Democrats are in majority. But again, it still happens.
Okay, environmental interests. So in about the 1970s, actually, Richard Nixon is the one who signs on to the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency.
Interesting.
So about the 1970s, we start to see environmental interest groups popping up. One of these would be like the World Wildlife Federation?
Fund?
Federation? I don't know.
Probably Federation.
I am envisioning a panda.
Yeah, I get you.
So anyway, more than 10,000 groups with $2.9 billion in revenue. Total, yes. So, but again, with as many groups that we have in support of, protecting the environment, and, conservation and all that, there's probably just as many groups working against those, to focus on oil, coal, fossil fuel industry, etc.
Right. Because it costs more money.
Right.
Like, those regulations are going to cost money, which dip into profits, and that's a big deal for people who have money.
Yes, and so Mr. Shaw brings up he has brought up several times the second bullet there, and they are profound. They make a profound policy impact, not because they have funding or a lot of funding, but because they're influential, because they have large numbers of people that support their cause, right? And especially since the 1970s, society has really started to focus more on the environment. When, global warming and all these statistics have come out with climate change. And it's a very popular issue in the United States in general. So because they have those numbers of people, not necessarily the funding, they can be influential when it comes to policymaking.
I feel like environmental groups really have a lot of power in just imagery.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like you might not care about pollution or anything like that, but then once you see, a picture of the
polar bears that are like skinny and dying,
the island, trash island, the size of Texas,
the dead coral reefs,
Pacific
all that
Ocean.
stuff.
That stays with you. Like I cut up my soda things, because of the turtles. And it's again, that's really important for them to have that. I mean, it's hard to argue against that. Okay, equality interests. Again, these are going to be focusing more on civil rights issues. We've talked a lot about the 14th Amendment guarantees, Equal Protection Clause, and the Due Process Clause. And minorities and women, especially, have been fighting for these guarantees that are in the 14th Amendment for many, many years now. For minorities, NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Brown v. Board in 1954, that ended segregation in public schools. Also, social welfare policies. Again, lots of things you could talk about here. Going back to healthcare is another big thing. But I think in general here they're more focused on gay rights, and issues that are not going to affect the majority of people. But that doesn't mean that people shouldn't have equal rights as well. For women, again, we've talked a lot about the Equal Rights Amendment before. The National Organization for Women is an interest group that fights specifically for women's rights and attempts to get equal pay for women. We've talked a lot about these throughout, so I think you guys are good there.
Okay, consumer and other public interest lobbies. So the policies in the public interest are going back to that collective good, the idea of collective good. So it's something that will benefit society as a whole. Okay. And then what is the public interest? It says each public interest group believes it knows what's in the public interest, but some religious groups believe they're acting in the public interest when they seek to impose their moral views on everyone. So I think a great example of this would be.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm thinking abortion.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
I was actually thinking of our FRQ, the Johnson Amendment.
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. But I was going to say, I put this in here because it was just what is the public interest.
Yeah.
And I thought that would be, and so I didn't, these are not my words. This was from the book still.
Sure.
Okay.
So, continue. Yeah, I mean, going back to kind of the religious groups idea. So, these anti-abortion groups, they truly fully believe that they are fighting for what is best for the collective good for everyone in society. But, there's a whole, half the country doesn't believe that that's what's in their best interest to take away abortion rights from women.
Or teaching evolution in school.
Absolutely. And then the Johnson Amendment, same thing. So, these religious leaders are kind of restricted on speaking out about politics. And so, by doing that, they think they're in the best interest of the public in general, but, their political ideology is not going to align with somebody else's. And so there's, conflict there.
But also we have since the beginning,
Absolutely.
We have always been a country about the separation of church and state.
Right.
And there's a lot of people that don't want that. They don't want, they would like to have more religion in public schools and things like that. But since our founding, we have not wanted that. And there's going to be contingents though that do. Okay, 10.5, understanding interest groups, finishing up here.
Yep.
So, actually, I'm going to go back here to this one. So, evaluate how well James Madison's ideas for controlling the influence of interest groups have worked in practice.
Okay.
Again, this is going back to Fed 10. Mm-hmm. Okay, nice and easy for you. So, does pluralism prevail? Meaning, is it functional? Does it work? We have a huge growth in the number of interest groups, as we have said. There is less clout for any one group, meaning that they have less influence. So theoretically, it works in a lot of ways. But part of the problem is that the interest groups don't really care about a functioning democracy. And I think that that's really the big takeaway is they are an interest group for a reason. They only care about one thing or, one set of things. They are not concerned with our democracy functioning. So business PACs, again, they are, obviously they're gonna spend a lot of money to prevent campaign donations that's just the irony of that is just beyond me. And again, as Ms. Womack said, wealthy groups are going to dominate, and that is getting back to elitism. And the final thing about the gridlock too is that you can't please everybody, and because of the way we have allowed interest groups to function in America, it has really now become just we don't get anything done. And I think the Senate is really right now is just a really great example of that. Even in a Republican majority Senate, even in a Democratic majority Senate, they have not passed any legislation. Hardly at all. They were barely able to pass the budget.
Stimulus, yeah.
Yeah. And they had to do budget reconciliation for that. Which,
right.
So again, like I think that's really the biggest thing is that, are interest groups the problem, or are, some people could say the filibuster is a problem. Like again, there's a reason why people are filibustering. So I don't know. It's a tough call, but I think that it's hard to argue against.
Okay, interest groups in the scope of government, individualistic and associational. I don't know.
The associational part is easy, but like the individualistic, meaning like it's within our the people can join like themselves, but also they only care about themselves as an interest group.
Yes.
I think kind of going back to what I said before.
Oh yeah.
Don't you think? Like they're individualistic in the sense that they don't
Absolutely.
really care about other
They don't
things.
care about a functioning democracy. They
Right.
care about what they are focused on, what their issue is.
But from a people perspective, it's still associational. Like
Right.
you can join a group and still get your voice heard that way, because as a person you don't really have a lot that you can say.
Yep.
Or you
So
don't
it
have a lot
gives
of
you
power.
more of a voice because
Yeah.
you're joined with others.
You have more power.
Yeah. And it's difficult to reduce spending. So again, we kind of already touched on this, but because we have so many interest groups and we're trying to appease all of their interests, government spending is just outrageous, and we can't stop the bleeding. We have to continue to spend to appease all of these different interest groups. And we know it's been a problem for a very long time now, and it's like created a vicious cycle. So groups lead to policy. And policy prompts new groups to form. Like literally when we create new policies, that's going to then lead to a new group who maybe opposes that policy to form. And then they're going to gain kind of some traction. And then they're going to be able to influence the government in certain ways. And there's going to be a policy created to appease them, which is going to counteract the policy that was just made. And then we just keep spending money.
I think you crushed it.
Thank you.
Hey guys, that's it.
Woo!
We appreciate you. See ya never.
Yeah,
Last
that's
one.
it.
Okay, goodbye.